Welcome everyone. I'm Karin Clarke, and thanks for visiting us here at Karin Clarke Gallery in downtown Eugene. I am so happy today, not just because I woke up and actually got to open my windows and let a little fresh air in, but because I knew Robert Schlegel, I almost called you Bobbert, Bob or Robert Schlegel from Banks, Oregon, was driving down to talk about his work in our new exhibit, Objective Shapes. And Robert is actually one of my favorite artists and favorite people, so it's just really a pleasure to have you here today. And he's going to lead us through some of the exhibit that consists of large canvas paintings as well as smaller paintings, and quite a lot of three-dimensional constructions that are a little bit different for this show, so I'm really excited to have them to complement the 2D work. Anyway, I'm rambling on too much. I think you're here to hear from Bob, so welcome.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity that you have given me over the years to show here. It's really been a nice thing, a challenge for me. I always get a little nervous about whether or not how the work's going to be received, and I'm really happy to be here.
Well, you have a lot of fans, and it grows and grows and grows. I haven't gotten this many calls before a show opened in a long time. People saying, I want to put my red dot on this before the show opens. So anyway, you're very much loved and appreciated here, so
well,
thank you.
The thing that's different maybe about this show has to do with the size of the work. And these pieces are larger than I've ever exhibited before, anywhere. And I think you've done a great job of displaying the work.
Thank you.
Lighting is tremendous, and it really shows off the color and the texture, and it's an excellent presentation. I appreciate that a lot. So this show was started off probably I don't know when we started talking about this, but in the last fall, before all this pandemic and before the smoke and everything, and I think this was the first piece, or one of the first pieces, and I had a vision that I wanted to do bigger pieces. I think that was influenced maybe by my brother who checks my work out periodically. He says, well, you got to focus maybe on something along that line, which I started to do, and then I get a little off track, and so I grew into something that was this plus some other things. So these initial works were influenced by a lot from they're called four-square houses, and they were built in the early 1915 and 1930, and you see them all over in Portland, and you also see them in rural areas. They're four-square because they're square houses, basically, and they're two-story, usually with a dormer of some kind. And my grandma that lived in Kalama, Washington, had one of these built back in the probably 1920s, late 1920s. So we visited there a lot when I was growing up, and for some reason, these particular structures resonate with me, and so that's probably where that started. And so this show has a lot of that type of architectonicness to it. This next one was, very similar. Added a little bit more color to it. I think the color sort of grew as this whole process started, and I think this was one of the next ones that I did. It was a little brighter, and then it morphed into these wacky ones maybe. But I do like the primitiveness of this work. Kind of reminds me of sketches that maybe I'd done when I was younger, or what my kids did when they were younger, and now what my grandkids do when they draw and sketch houses. Although I've taken the liberty to, again, they become four-square type structures. This one, and I don't know how much we want to move around here, but this one in the corner as well. I think that this was maybe the last piece that I did in this series. And the colors got pretty primary, and they morphed from being somber palette to more of a lively palette. And it's weird because the pandemic had begun when I was doing these, and I'm not quite sure why. You'd think it'd be the other way around, but maybe I was trying to maintain a sense of optimism through all this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I noticed you brought your sketchbook with you today, which I think is really fascinating, and maybe you could share a little bit about it, and I think that informs your process into some, developing these larger paintings.
So, there were some, I read a book by Schlegel and Nicholas Kristof called Tightrope. They're writers for the New York Times. And Nicholas Kristof grew up in Yam Hill, which is close to where I live, and talked about the relationships that he had maintained over the years with his high school classmates. And although I don't think my relationships with my high school classmates are as significant as his, it did speak to me, that community. And so I began on a trip back from the beach. I stopped in Yam Hill and did some sketches, which turned into some larger paintings. But this was a sketch that I had done. It's charcoal to start with, and then I put medium on the paper, and I wanted to make it more monochromatic than have a lot of color in it. And so this particular sketch morphed into a painting that I have over there. I don't know if we want to go from here over there. Or,
why not?
So this is what, maybe 10 by 12 or something, 9 by 12, and so that this color, this became this, and this is what probably a 3 by 36 by 48 or something.
Yeah,
close to that.
3 by 48.
And again, it's monochromatic primarily, but the emotions of reading that book, knowing that town, and fitting it into some kind of architectural landscape. And I've done several of these that are kind of offshoots of this image.
Wonderful.
The other things in the sketchbook, we can probably transition maybe into some of this figurative stuff.
Okay.
These smaller pieces, I'm not quite sure how they happened. I know that I was at the studio one evening and it was pretty late, and maybe I was just tired and I was just messing around, and I started doing these sketches of. A lot of times when I travel, I do sketches of people, and so I started to play around with something that looked like this, and then I do a lot of bird representations, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll combine the bird and the figurative work, and so it sort of turned into these whimsical, and again, maybe that's part of my response to the pandemic, is the optimism that I sort of hope that I can maintain in my life. And so they became this is kind of morphed into these paintings. They're smaller, they're multimedia, I use stamps. These three all happen to have masks. And I think this figure came from a Saturday market in Portland, and And then more recently, I've been sketches, I guess, for a future time. Sort of combining getting away from a bird, and my brother and sister-in-law have goats, and so this goat happens to have a very interesting neck move on the when he puts his feet on the fence. So that has become that.
That's great.
It's another sketch from travels to London a couple of years ago of schoolgirls at the Tate Modern, and these small sketches will morph into something larger, and the biggest, I think the biggest paintings of figurative work that I have is the birder. And again, I don't quite know how that happened. It was late at night, as I mentioned, and I was tired, and I just started messing around with it. This started with a small sketch, and the idea of the binoculars just sort of seemed to fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I usually don't. I hate titles of paintings. I don't really enjoy doing that part of it. But I thought, well, birder, that sort of makes sense, and so it fit.
And it found a home, and about 3 other people were mad because they wanted that painting. So you working in a studio late at night, tired,
right.
it works.
And I hadn't done a lot of paintings with gray ground. And actually, there's red underneath.
I like that.
Red underneath this, but gray over the top. And I think it was that color scheme as well, because the yellow, the red, blue, purple, and those colors I haven't used a lot, and so that palette, my palette changed, and it changed during the time that this show developed, and I enjoy working with a different palette. It's been a nice creative spurt, I guess.
I wanted to make sure we had time to talk about the Under Quarantine series of these houses on these pedestals, which, by the way, he made the pedestal, a lot of people have been surprised to hear that he made the whole thing. The houses are attached to the pedestal. And anyway, I'm not going to ask any specific questions, but tell us about these, because this is definitely a very particular series, and it seems very specific to our time.
Well, I have to give credit to Lori Hall, who's an Oregon artist that lives up in the Portland area. She's a jeweler and magnificent artist, and she and I talked to her about the presentation of these assemblages or structures, and so she gave me a lot of ideas about the wooden pedestals, which became somewhat of a pain in the neck because I'm not really a very good woodworker. And then my brother talked to me a little bit about the base on it, putting some weight down there, which adds to the composition, and it also adds to the weight, to have weight at the bottom because these are so tall. But the verticalness of it seemed important, and I hadn't done the pedestal part. I did last. I finished these maybe a month or so ago. The structures or the assemblages or constructions, whatever we want to call them, are basically again they're the four square architecture. And originally I was not going to put any windows in them or do any kind of detail work. They sat around in the studio for probably maybe a month or 6 weeks, and I knew I wanted to present them in some way. I decided, well, maybe I'll start cutting them up a little bit, and then this was in the pandemic was raging at this point. And so I inserted openings that exposed some of the images from the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I have Dr. Fauci somewhere here, and I have images of workers and people that are masked. These are assembled with wire and texture. I've tried to put some plaster on these. They're cardboard, and I use wood, and I get good advice from my brother on bases, how to the support here.
I love that I know it was a pain to build the base, but I love it because it really controls the whole presentation rather than me just putting it on one of my regular pedestals. And it also seems to heighten the sense of isolation, like that the house is really out on this island, kind of on stilts, and I don't know, I just feel like you can read more into it. It's such a stronger mood because of that, and it separates it from the rest of the gallery and the environment. So it psychologically, it resonates it enhances that feeling of isolation somehow.
Well, when we first talked, we talked about the kind of pedestals that you have to put them on. And so I don't know exactly what happened. I think part of that was Lori's input and influence. And
well, people seem thrilled to realize you can actually take the whole thing home, because often when people buy sculpture, there's that moment of kind of like, well, where do I put this? or how do I display it? Because not everybody has gallery stands in their living room. But this is, it's a one unit.
Well, Peggy, my wife, thought, we had these up in the studio, and she says, well, and I can't remember exactly whether we had a black surface on it or what. But she said, yeah, she liked the black surface, and I like the black surface because it covers up all the mistakes. And you can't see all the foobahs I did on the construction of these things. There's a fair number of screws and blocks of wood, and so
they're hardy.
It's fun. And I like when these are up against the wall. I like the shadow that there's a secondary piece of this that is the shadow that the assemblage throw on the wall.
Lena, zoom in on this one that has a little more color over here.
Right, quite a bit different feel with this guy, and there's a lot more texture to this, and so this just kind of morphed over time. And the longer they sit around in the studio, the more stuff happens to it, and at some point in time, I need to stop, which I guess the beginnings of the show was going to be the end of the work, for a while anyway. But this was a fun one to do, and the colors just happened. I think I can't remember exactly what I put on. I think I put tar paper on the top of this roof, or fabric. Maybe it was a fabric that didn't come out. It wasn't like, I had this black in the beginning, and it didn't work very well. So then I put red oxide on it, and I think that helped. And wire, and then I started stripping the cardboard, and so that has kind of been part of it.
I love it.
So these are these sculptures began, I think, were influenced by the Bay Area people, Joan Brown and Manuel Neri and that crowd, and they. I've seen some of their assemblages in pictures, and they did birds and things, and so this, which I've done over a period of time as well, but then they've kind of morphed into these more related to my paintings, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that influence and the color, I think their colors are so bright and kind of unlike the other ones, but the quarantine ones are. That color, I wanted it to be intentional not necessarily to make them into a sanitarium kind of a place, but there's more of a somber look at maybe our time right now and
They do feel somber.
getting it through it.
I'm wondering if any of the, by the way, Lena Freeman is graciously filming today. She worked for me for several years, and now she's at the School of Journalism. And see, here she is. And Lena I wanted to mention that people can type in questions if people are joining us live and they have any questions. I was going to start things off by perhaps a quirky little question for Bob here. But it came up yesterday, and if I don't ask you now, I'll probably forget. I noticed that there were two pieces that had this specific hand gesture, and I'm probably not cool enough to know what it means. Is there any meaning to that, or is it just a shape you liked?
Well, so it's a compositional thing for me, because I thought if that wasn't there, I don't know, I thought it needed something there, rather than being black. So it's sort of like the binoculars in the front of that one. It's more of a compositional piece. Although I'm a great fan of Egon Schiele, and I love Egon Schiele's figurative work, especially the way he renders hands.
Absolutely.
And so this isn't anything like his work.
But I know what you mean, the spirit of it and the gnarliness or something. So, but it's just that there's another piece around the corner too that has like 3 of the fingers and it's just, and it almost, the only thing that came to mind for me was, aside from it being compositional, is that it almost sort of mimicked that you have so many birds and the claws, and I thought maybe you're trying to make the hands almost more claw-like or something. But anyway, I've been just kind of going crazy looking at these. So.
Well, I like the long appendage piece of it, and so that was my reasoning behind that.
All right.
And maybe sort of a heartfelt, across to your heart sense of serenity or peace or whatever.
Well, this piece is going to a wonderful home, and she's become a big collector of your work. I think she told me that that's maybe her 9th piece of yours. So apparently your artwork is addictive. So I don't know. I suggested maybe we could do a support group. But I don't want to encourage that support group.
Collecting art can be addictive. That is a problem.
So one of the questions was, Bob, can you talk about the process of producing a painting? Steps, tools, the kind of paint, and other materials.
Well, I talked a little bit earlier, when we were talking about the sketchbook. Most of the things I do start with a sketch. And that I use acrylic medium, I use charcoal pencil, acrylic medium. It smears things around on that paper, and that begins to get things not real tight, and so it makes marks, and I need that because I have a tendency to be pretty tight. And so when I move it from the sketch book into a piece of paper, it's not that much different. But when I move it to a canvas, then it does become different. And lately I've been using medium charcoal sketches on the canvas, using the medium on the canvas. It moves the charcoal around, and you can't really see that in these, except maybe in this one. I've got charcoal lines that you can see, but underneath this is a sketch of some kind, and then I start applying paint, and the palette that I use, you can see. I mean, it's pretty obvious the colors of the paint, and I use brushes. I use my fingers. I sometimes use a rag or a paper rag to move things around. And then when it gets to be where I'm done with it, I'll set it up, and I usually think, God, it's a great it's a great painting, and then I come back the next day, and boy, I don't know what I was thinking exactly, but it needs a little more attention.
I think those of us that do art are comforted by that comment. Thank you.
So, and I hate, sometimes I leave them up for a month, and I thought, yeah, boy, I don't know what to do with it. And so, and then somehow something happens, and something's added. There's something about the painting that I don't like, or something that doesn't quite work. And so I'll go back in and work on it some more, and eventually it reaches some sense of closure. This painting was an example of, just before I brought this down here, I had these, I've sort of worked on these frame idea a little bit, and I had this frame extending up here. And I think maybe 2 days before we put this to bed, I got rid of that, and I think it adds to the composition of this painting. I don't know whether that makes it, what it does, but it makes more sense to me. I put an acrylic soft gel gloss medium over the paintings as a barrier, so that they can be cleaned, and that's about it.
Looks like we got a bunch more questions.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Sure.
find a couple more, and we're almost at the 30-minute mark, so maybe we'll answer a couple more questions. And
So one of the questions was, what influenced you to modify your palette to move from the more muted tones at the houses to bright colors of pieces like the burger?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. In my head, I started this when I was, we talked about earlier. This was maybe the beginning, and in my head, this was sort of the palette, and this was sort of the mood that I wanted to establish, or that I was in at that time. I think part of it is an emotional state that I get into. So we're in the middle of winter, which I like winter. I like winter because it's black and white, and there's not a lot of color. And maybe as the spring evolved, it got more colorful. I don't exactly know whether it was related to the environment or not, but then this again was the second one, I think, in this series, or second or third one, there was a higher contrast. And I like that creamy palette, and I like the combination of color in the palette. And so I just continued to futz with that, and then I thought, well, I'll just go crazy and make them this bright thing, and with acid green, and see how that worked. And I mean, I was playing with the color, I think. More than anything else, and so that's how that happened.
what else do we have on there?
Do you sometimes overpaint a canvas, completely changing the subject?
Oh yeah, do that. I do that with some regularity, and when I do that, I like to let what was underneath it inform the painting that I'm working on, and I'll leave that in there. Sometimes it doesn't quite make sense, and it's a little. In terms of the representation, but I do paint over the tops. I don't know if I have anything in here that I've done that with exactly, but I don't think I have one here that I've done that with.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, any other comments on the show or on your work that you wanted to share that we didn't tap your mind for?
Well, I can say that this is the only show that I've had to rent a U-Haul to bring the work. And my grandson David helped me, and that was awfully nice of him to do that. And it there was a lot of pieces. I think there's like close to 30 things here, and they were odd shaped and they were big, so they didn't fit inside my little Forester.
Well, people have been loving this exhibit. I know there's a lot of people that are still quite housebound, and if they weren't housebound because of COVID, now the smoke is really keeping them at home. But I really appreciate you coming down and sharing live here like this on Facebook, so people can get to experience the show, get to see you, you know, in lieu of an artist reception, and you know, we're all such big fans. And just to remind people, we're actually about to open the gallery, so we're open today, and we're open till 5:30, so you can come on down and see the show today if you feel up for it. We're also open tomorrow, Saturday, from 10 to 4. And then the show is on display next week as well, Wednesday through Friday from 12 to 5:30, and Saturdays from 10 to 4. Also know that we're really happy to make appointments. I know there's still people that would like to meet outside of regular hours, and so we're happy to come in a little early or later, or on a day we're closed, and meet with you and, you know, allow you to experience this show in person, because it's great on video, but there's nothing like seeing the work and getting up close and seeing every drip of paint and every stamp that might be tucked into the painting that you might not be able to see from a photograph. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you to Robert Schlegel for being here today and bringing his work to Eugene. And thank you, Lena Freeman, for being the video mastermind. Anyway, have a great day. It's raining out. Hallelujah. Thank you.